When you can't watch, listen. Get the latest news, business, and news headlines on SiriusXM. Anytime, anywhere. Fox News Audio on SiriusXM. America is listening.
The Russian government is linking efforts to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal to international sanctions against the Kremlin over its invasion of Ukraine. The move is potentially casting the talks into doubt. Let's bring in Peter Brooks, a senior research fellow on weapons of mass destruction and counterproliferation at the Heritage Foundation. So then President Donald Trump essentially drove a stake through the heart of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement, said it was a bad agreement and pulled the United States out of it. The Biden administration, obviously Joe Biden was vice president when the thing was inked. The Biden administration essentially wants to return to that deal, correct?
That's what it looks like, John, and that's very troubling. President Trump was right to get out of the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran nuclear deal, as it's also known. There's several flaws with it, John. One is that it has sunset provisions. This means that certain restrictions, timelines that prevent Iran from moving forward with uranium enrichment end at a certain period. In fact, they would end in 2025 since the agreement started in 2015. So that's troubling. In other words, Iran hasn't sworn off enriching uranium, which can be used for bombs, in perpetuity. They can go back to that. The other thing that the problem with the agreement was it didn't capture Iran's dogged determination to build ballistic missiles. They have the largest missile arsenal in the Middle East, and they have a space program that they call civilian that actually would aid them in the capability of developing intercontinental ballistic missiles. And you can imagine where those might be pointed if they were to develop them. The other thing, John, is that the inspection regime is troubling. Like, for instance, we cannot visit, or the International Atomic Energy Agency, which monitors this agreement, cannot visit military bases. And of course, the nuclear program is under the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, this paramilitary group that supports the Iranian regime. Imagine that, that you can't go to military bases, and the nuclear program is under this group that operates out of military bases. You should have anytime, anywhere inspections. The other problem is that Iran was supposed to come clean, John, on the work they did prior to the 2015 agreement to the International Atomic Energy Agency, like where you're working on bomb designs and things along this line. And of course, the Iranians have denied this, but the Israelis a number of years ago spirited a bunch of documents out of Iran that showed that Iran was planning to build 5 nuclear weapons, or as many as 5 nuclear weapons. So going back to that original agreement, the JCPOA, and we're just hearing back channel talk about this, is very troubling. And then, of course, the Russians play a role because they're one of the main players in this agreement, along with the French, the British, the Germans, the United States, and China.
Right. And as you were speaking, and we were watching footage of millions of Ukrainians trying to evacuate their country under this horrific Russian onslaught, the United States is essentially depending on Russia to try to bring back this deal. Let me read you a quote from Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. He says, "We need guarantees these sanctions will in no way affect the trading, economic, and investment relations contained in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, for the Iranian nuclear program." So, the Biden administration, on the one hand, is trying to slap sanctions on Russia, but on the other hand, they're trying to beg Russia and its sort of client state, Iran, into playing ball with them.
Yeah, no, this is very troubling, and we shouldn't cut any deals with Russia while they're invading a sovereign country like Ukraine. So very, very troubling. We need to find a way around this.
Peter Brooks, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Peter, thank you.
Good to be with you.
Well, gas prices, they are up 30 cents from a week ago as more lawmakers from both parties call for a ban on the import of Russian energy. We'll take it up with economist Peter Marisi next.
The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews is on the ground in Ukraine right now responding to this devastating crisis.
The current situation here is very critical. There is a great concern for the more than 200,000 Jewish people who desperately need food, medicine, and emergency supplies.
Your urgently needed gift of only $45 will help rush food, water, medicine, and emergency supplies for one suffering Jewish family in Ukraine who has nowhere to turn.
The fellowship has been working here on the ground in Ukraine with our trusted partners for over 30 years.
The distribution centers and volunteers are standing by. We need your help now.
Your emergency gift of only $45 will help rush food, water, medicine, and emergency supplies for one Jewish family in Ukraine. Please call or go online now.
This is a time for America to stand tall. You know, they depend on us. The world depends on us. Energy has been weaponized. We have the ability to basically counter that weapon. We really do.
It's been said already, Putin has weaponized energy. I don't believe this country should be importing anything from Russia.
Putin's major source of revenue is selling oil and gas, and Biden's given an exception.
I'm all for that. Ban it.
Bipartisan calls, that's rare in Washington these days, to ban Russian oil imports into the United States. As Russia's war in Ukraine rages on, the price of oil is skyrocketing. Average gas prices here at home now approaching $4 a gallon. University of Maryland economist Peter Marisi joins us now. Peter, I always enjoy reading your columns and seeing how essentially, money makes the world go around. Right now, oil money is funding Vladimir Putin's adventurism in Ukraine. There's talk of banning Russian oil imports, a government-wide ban. Do you support that idea?
I think it's a good idea. I don't think we should be buying anything from Russia at this time, nothing whatsoever. The only energy that the West needs right now from Russia is natural gas in Europe. I don't know why we're buying any oil at all.
Because the United States can produce its own, and in fact produces more than Russia. I want to put up a chart, and it's number 2 for our control room. I'm sorry, number 3, world oil production. In October 2021, the United States pumped about 11.5 million barrels a day. Russia, 10.4, and Saudi Arabia, 10.01. We are a larger oil producer than Russia, and we could be even bigger.
Absolutely. The president has imposed policies, and it's encouraged private actors to voluntarily impose policies that's made it difficult to drill for oil in the United States. Right now, you need a 20% rate of return to justify a large oil project. For a green energy project, it's 5%. That's absurd. Essentially, the president has been discriminating against oil and encouraging private actors to do the same. Private equity and so forth, banks and what have you. And this is really a travesty. We are capable of pumping much more oil. We're capable of producing much more natural gas. We should be building LNG terminals for export and to send that natural gas to Europe. The Europeans could right now replace a significant amount of the Russian gas by importing American gas.
I want to put up a list of the companies worldwide that have said they will no longer deal with Russian oil. That includes BP, Shell, Total Energies from France, Equinor, and ExxonMobil. If countries are doing this on their own, should the U.S. government get involved and say, an outright ban is necessary?
I think it makes a statement, and I think it's a useful statement. Right now, we should be importing zero from Russia, and it's the same for the Europeans, except the gas they need. But that can be dramatically reduced, and within 3 years, they could have enough LNG terminals to never buy gas from the Russians again. That makes a lot of sense to me.
LNG, liquefied natural gas.
Right, exactly.
What about the argument, though, that if the United States stops buying Russian oil, they'll just turn around and sell it to China or North Korea, for instance?
Well, let the Chinese and North Koreans buy it. The Russians really don't want to become a client state to the Chinese. Do you think the Chinese would pay top dollar for their oil and gas if the situation was they had to sell it to them? I doubt it. The less the Russians get for their oil and gas, and the fewer customers that they have, the less they will get, makes it more difficult for them to finance their military machine. It's no accident that the Russians are doing this at a time when the price of oil was high. It helped them finance this adventure. And it's time to recognize Putin and Russia for what it is and to cut it off.
So economically, what is the best way, in your view, to cripple the Russian war machine?
Well, we've done a lot of the right things, but we should completely cut them out of the financial network. Right now, they're able to access it for the purposes of oil and gas, and there's some other loopholes, and we can shut those down. You know, it should be possible to run an economy, at least on what you make domestically, with an internal payment system. I'm sure the Chinese, if we did this to them, could run their economy internally, even if they couldn't trade. However, the Russians are not technologically sophisticated other than building weapons and, frankly, you know, getting certain non-ferrous metals out of the ground and refining them. The oil production in Russia requires Western technology. That's why they have all these joint ventures with outfits like Exxon. And, of course, those folks are now pulling out.
Of course, there are, you know, those who want to see the United States wean itself from fossil fuels say, you know, we shouldn't drill more in this country. But the fact of the matter is the Russian energy production is exceedingly dirty, isn't it? I mean, if we're going to pump 1 million barrels or 10 million barrels a day out in the United States, it's a much cleaner process than it is in Russia.
Absolutely. It isn't like we're going to use less oil if we don't pump it here, because we can't transition from electric vehicles, to electric vehicles from gasoline any more quickly than battery technology advances and Detroit offers us the vehicles. Right now, we have a bottleneck. We can't move any faster than we're moving. All we're doing is making things harder on working families by limiting the supply of gasoline. If you raise the price of gasoline from $3 a gallon to $5 a gallon, which is happening, you don't conserve very much. It's a very foolish thing to do. You have to understand that some of the climate change folks, for example, in the House of Representatives, who criticized President Biden for not saying he was going to do more to curtail oil production at a time like this in his State of the Union, it's a religion. And unfortunately, they're worshiping false gods. We all want to cut back what we use, but capping American production isn't the way to do it.
We have about 30 seconds left, Peter. Visa and MasterCard, we just learned at the beginning of this hour, have announced they will no longer conduct operations in Russia. What does that do? Does it simply inconvenience consumers there? What's the effect?
Oh, it does inconvenience consumers there. It makes it very difficult for business-to-business transactions, and it makes it difficult for ordinary people to get around. When Apple Pay shut down a few days ago, Russians were stuck in the subway because they couldn't get fare cards, the people that rely on their iPhones. These are useful things to do. You know, going into this adventure, this terrible, terrible adventure, the Russians had a lot of domestic support. So, you know, we should not be that kind to the Russian people at a time like this. If they want this to stop, they know where Vladimir lives, and they should remove him.
University of Maryland economist and economics professor Peter Morici, thank you.
Take care.
Well, amidst the horrors of war, a moment of humanity at the Lviv train station. Recognize that tune? A young woman playing What a Wonderful World at on the piano today as Ukrainians try to flee their home country. Thousands of women and children arrived in the western Ukraine city as the state railway added more trains to rescue people from fierce Russian attacks on eastern cities. I'm John Scott. Our live special coverage continues with an expanded edition of the Fox Report. Top of the hour, straight ahead. Those shots in the distance are coming from Russian soldiers firing warning shots against protesters in Ukraine. At least one of the demonstrators appears to have been hit. The war in Ukraine now entering day 11 and showing no signs of slowing down. Good evening, I'm John Scott, and this is a special 2-hour edition of the Fox Report. Russian forces continue their assault on civilians and cities throughout Ukraine, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky met virtually with U.S. lawmakers today, pleading for more assistance as his country fights back against the invasion. Meantime, new cell phone video shows damage from inside Europe's largest nuclear power plant, which is in Ukraine but is now under Russian control. Video shows twisted pipes, a broken window, holes in the ceiling, and what appears to be an empty shell casing on the floor. Shooting erupts at a protest in northeastern Ukraine, just one recent example of Russia's attacks on civilians. We have Fox team coverage from across the region. First, we go to Trey Yingst. He's live in Ukraine's capital of Kyiv. Trey.
John, good evening. In the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, a few minutes ago, air raid sirens sounded, telling people to get underground immediately. This city remains under attack at this hour. And tonight, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky trying to rally both his troops and civilians for what could be a very long and bloody battle. Zelensky did speak to lawmakers today, urging the stop of Russian oil purchases. He's also calling on fighter jets to be delivered to this country. But I want you to take a listen to what he had to say to the Ukrainian people.
Don't give up, don't stop the resistance. They shout to the occupiers, go home. They drive them away from our territory. They block the roads for them. Every meter of our Ukraine land won by protest and humiliation of the invaders is a step forward, a step toward victory for our entire state.
Zelensky today also calling for a no-fly zone to be implemented over his country, something that has been immediately rejected by NATO countries. They're concerned this could lead to a much larger escalation. And today, Russian President Vladimir Putin weighed in on the topic. Take a listen.
Now we are hearing that a no-fly zone must be established over the territory of Ukraine. But any move in this direction will be viewed by us as a participation in the armed conflict of whichever side whose territory will pose a threat to our service members.
It's not a question as to why Zelensky wants to have a no-fly zone over his country. We have seen devastating images across Ukraine. In Mariupol, the southern critical port city, a large fire broke out following shellings yesterday. We've also seen here in the capital of Kyiv, Russian missiles slamming into apartment buildings. And in Kharkiv, the second largest city in Ukraine, artillery and air campaigns continue to strike civilian areas. John?
Trey, what do you know about the request from the Ukrainians that former Soviet countries like Poland send in those aircraft that Ukrainian pilots would be able to fly? Are any of those planes making it across the border into the Ukrainians' hands?
Not yet, and there was some early mixed reporting about why that was the case. Zelensky is asking for these planes because he understands if he can control the skies, especially over the capital of Kyiv, it will make it a lot easier for ground forces, and it will prevent Russian President Putin from ordering really a campaign that would destroy a lot of civilian infrastructure, take many lives, and then ultimately allow his troops to move in. So that's part of the reason he's asking for this no-fly zone. As it relates to the jets that could come to this country, they've been slowed in the request, but it appears there is some hope for the Ukrainian people and the military today following those conversations with U.S. lawmakers.
Yeah, and when Putin says that a no-fly zone, he would consider a major escalation of the war, it just seems like NATO is, in some respects, quivering in fear of what Putin might do.
Look, we met with Zelensky just a few days ago here in the Ukrainian capital, and he said just that, basically calling out NATO, saying, look, if you do not support us and close down the airspace while giving us more weapons, the country could fall. He was very realistic in his conversations about what would happen if the airspace over Ukraine was not closed. And yesterday, he even called out NATO countries and leadership, basically saying they're weak for not making this decision and being too afraid of Vladimir Putin. John.
Trey Yingst reporting live from Kyiv, Ukraine, and doing a great job of it. Thank you, Trey. Well, it is the largest movement of refugees in Europe since World War II, and the western city of Lviv has become an important checkpoint for Ukrainians fleeing their country. Lucas Tomlinson is in Lviv, live with the latest for us. Lucas.
John, that's right. Hundreds of thousands of refugees have poured into this city in western Ukraine. We're located just 40 miles from the Polish border. Not everybody is fleeing the country. Some are staying right here in Lviv, where the city has opened its arms to those refugees. We saw today makeshift soup kitchens, people handing out meals. We also spoke to some people who have come here to fight the Russians, including these former British Royal Marines. I asked one of them, what is going wrong with Vladimir Putin's military strategy here in Ukraine?
Because of the spirit that's going on here at the end of the day. I mean, you feel the energy, can't you? If you look around, I mean, it's people full of fight. I don't see anyone scared, and you know, I think it's a thing that's brought a lot of us here, isn't it, lads?
We also spoke to a family of four who had just arrived with the thousands of others here by train. They had just escaped the city where that nuclear power plant came under attack 2 nights ago. It's mostly women and children come here to Lviv because military-aged males have to stay and fight. That's part of President Zelensky's decree. The refugees coming here fleeing a war-torn Ukraine, cities destroyed by the Russians, such as Kharkiv and Mariupol, as Trey just described, and the capital. Some here think they have to stay with relatives because they can't make it to the border, John. Others using this place as a rest stop before fleeing the country, not just to Poland, but to Slovakia and Hungary as well. Now, earlier we visited this makeshift soup kitchen. The crew here has made enough stew for 5,000 people over the past few days. Many Ukrainians here donating food, these large kettles, in their time to prepare it. Now, this is one of the oldest Catholic churches here in Lviv. Pope John Paul II once visited here 2 decades ago and preached. In addition to preparing for Mass tonight, the cathedral is also preparing for potential airstrikes by Russian jets, boarding up stained glass windows and also ancient relics inside.
It is the heart of our church, so it's very important to prepare this building and ourselves to.
Now, it's not just Ukrainians fleeing their country. There's hundreds of thousands of Russians as well, John. Just as an exercise, you can go on the computer, try to book a train from Moscow to Tallinn or to Helsinki. You won't find any trains available for the next 2 weeks. John?
Lucas Tomlinson in Lviv, Ukraine. Lucas, the idea of bringing in those aircraft from, say, Poland, you know, former Soviet states that Ukrainians would be able to fly, that would make a huge difference if they could attack some of those Russian rocket launchers and missile silos, missile sites that are doing such terrible damage to cities like Kyiv.
That's right, John. We're talking MiG-29s. This is the Soviet equivalent of the U.S. Air Force F-15 air superiority fighter. Can also attack targets on the ground. You're right, it probably would make a difference. Keep in mind, this is very contested airspace over the ground in Ukraine. Ukrainian jets are still flying. There's also third-generation air defense systems that are still shooting down those Russian jets. In fact, today, according to reports, has not been a very good day for the Russian Air Force. A number of Russian helicopter gunships and fighter jets have been shot down. There's actually some pictures on social media of Russian pilots. Some of them allegedly were part of the crew that were bombing Syria in the last few years. In fact, some people think that was the training ground for this operation here after the Soviet involvement in Syria started in 2015, John. But there's no question President Zelensky wants more fighter jets, air superiority. He wants that no-fly zone. But U.S. officials do caution a no-fly zone over this country, John, would be akin to an act of war against the Russians. The U.S. Air Force is not about to start shooting down Russian jets and helicopter gunships. That would spark a war. The Russians have nuclear weapons, about 5,000 nuclear warheads. Much different story than the no-fly zones over Libya and Iraq. And also a no-fly zone probably have no effect on some of the 500 missiles the Russians are firing to this country, because you can't tell those missiles to turn around, John.
Well, it would be good to get some aircraft, more aircraft into the hands of the Ukrainians, that's for sure. Lucas Tomlinson live from Lviv, Ukraine. Thanks, Lucas. Well, the White House is weighing a ban on Russian oil and natural gas imports. Rising gas prices here at home in the U.S. pose a major concern. Alexandria Hoff is live in Wilmington, Delaware, where the president is spending the weekend. Alexandria.
Well, John, we have just learned that President Biden wrapped up a phone call with President Zelensky. It lasted about 45 minutes. That was just moments ago. According to Zelensky, they discussed security, financial support, and continued sanctions against Russia. Now, a short time ago, one of Zelensky's pleas that he made on that earlier video conference call with U.S. lawmakers, that was granted. He called for Visa and MasterCard to suspend operations in Russia, and those companies have now obliged. In a statement, Visa Chinese chairman and CEO wrote, quote, "This war and the ongoing threat to peace and stability demand we respond in line with our values." Senator John Hoeven was among the 200 or so who was part of that hour-long call. Listen.
We talked about sanctions and how we need to cut off completely Russia's ability to sell energy, which is our only source of income.
In Washington, there has been a bipartisan push to end the purchasing of Russian oil, with lawmakers calling it a moral obligation at this point. Now, the White House had said that cutting off Russian energy could hurt the U.S. more than Russia, since Russian oil and gas make up about 10% of what we are importing, but a tiny fraction of what Russia exports. The concern, of course, is over how this might impact already high gas prices.
We don't import a lot of Russian oil, but we are looking at options that we can take right now.
Now, the White House is also asking Congress for $10 billion that would help to assist Ukraine and allies that are now fostering refugees that are coming into their countries. And $59 million of that is geared towards targeting Russian oligarchs. They are looking to go after whatever assets they can that may be held in U.S. dollars. John.
Alexandria Hoff reporting from Delaware, where the president is. Thank you. Well, the Pentagon has opened up a direct line of communication to the Russian Defense Ministry to try to avoid dangerous misunderstandings between the two nations. Meantime, the U.S. and its allies continue to send military aid and support to Ukraine. Mark Meredith, live at the Pentagon with the latest on that. Mark.
John, good evening to you. Well, Ukraine's president says more aid would certainly be better, and you've been talking about it at the beginning of the newscast of the latest developments today, that there's been some consideration from the U.S. that would, speaking with other NATO countries, about Poland potentially sending some of its jets to help Ukraine's Air Force. It's not a done deal yet. An administration official telling Fox that there are many logistical challenges that will be associated with something like this, and this really is a decision for Poland to make, but they're also looking at the possibility of the U.S. basically trying to help backfill Poland's Air Force if they were to send those MiG jets into Ukraine. At this point, though, like I said, nothing done yet. However, as Lucas was talking about, Ukraine's Air Force seems to have had a pretty strong day, at least according to Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who tweeted this earlier today. He said, right now, Russia's Air Force is having their worst day yet in Ukraine, multiple shoot downs and dead and captured pilots. And while Ukraine is asking repeatedly for the no-fly zone to be set up over its skies, the U.S. once again insisting today that is a non-starter. But officials here at the Pentagon say they are doing a lot to bolster Ukraine's military, whether it be financial assistance or the constant influx of weapon shipments, which has continued ever since the war broke out. We're also still waiting to see, though, whether or not those fighter jets from Poland or other countries may make their way in. But lawmakers from both parties say they are ready to keep aiding the fight. Pentagon officials urging Russia not to attack Ukraine's nuclear power facilities, calling the recent attack at one facility reckless. Today, we also heard from the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which said it continues to monitor the facility now in Russian control and say that there have been no radiation leaks observed. We know that the U.S. Department of Energy is taking the lead on this compared to the Defense Department, letting them know that they're also monitoring the situation. But of course, there's been so many concerns about what could happen if things were to get out of hand of the nuclear power plants, which would impact not only Ukraine, John, but of course, so much of Europe. John.
And we remember Chernobyl also in Ukraine. Mark Meredith, live at the Pentagon. Thank you.
You bet.
Up next, we'll discuss Putin's role on the world stage and what would happen to Russia if he fails and somehow is replaced.